Welcome to the Power of Partnership podcast. I'm Riane Eisler, President of the Center for Partnership Systems. This podcast brings you the voices from the partnership movement, people using partnership practices to build a world that values caring, nature, and shared prosperity. The Power of Partnership podcast is hosted by Cherri Jacobs Pruitt, a health policy and partnership scholar. Today, Cherri interviews Ron Kim, six-term New York Assemblyman, on his vision for a partnership-based political agenda to build a world that values caring, nature, and shared prosperity. And now, on to the POP podcast.
Welcome, Ron, and thank you so much for joining us for the Power of Partnership podcast. So you have been serving as a New York Assemblyman since 2012 in the same district where you grew up. At the time you were elected, you were the first Korean American Assemblyman in the New York State Legislature. Can you share a bit about your life as an Assemblyman and what it looks like in any given week in terms of what are the issues that you're dealing with?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I've been in the state service for the last 11 years, like you said, going on my sixth term. When I first was elected, I was not only the first Korean American, I was the only a person of Asian American descent to serve in the legislature. But in the course of last 11 years, so we have a number of other Asian American elected officials, more women than ever to serve in Albany and beyond. So I'm very happy about that. But my everyday fluctuates, almost every single day. There seems to be a crisis these days, every single moment. Unfortunately, coming out of COVID, we have a crisis around homelessness in urban places like New York City and other urban cities around the country. We have mental health crisis. We have crime that's on the rise, and people are feeling unsafe, both physically and economically all around us.
And so can you share how you first learned about Riane Eisler's partnership domination social lens and how that helps you address some of these challenges and issues?
I met her at a conference before COVID, about 4 years ago, at a conference called Bretton Woods Conference. This was the 75th year where we were celebrating some of the new economic philosophies that we should be looking at after 75 years ago, when we made the U.S. dollar the main currency and the reserve currency of the world. But a lot of things have changed, and a lot of people have been left behind in some of the economies, and more people should be focused on how do we really create a caring infrastructure that could focus on caring our communities and people around us. But we haven't done enough of the framework and groundwork to get that done. And she spoke beautifully at this conference, and I automatically became a fan. I started reading some of her books, and I reached out to her about some of the proposals that we're working on that was aligned with her vision. And we've been in touch with the partnership for several years now. And I look forward to continuing to learn and understand what it will take to solve some of society's biggest problems.
Mm-hmm. Can you think of an example to share with our listeners who may be new to Riane's partnership domination continuum and her caring economics philosophies in terms of what some of that shift would look like in your community in dealing with some of these issues that you're facing?
Yeah, as a whistleblower in COVID that called out some of the failing policies around long-term care in New York State, including the governor of New York for lying to us and hiding valuable information, to the public and lawmakers, where we needed that data to make sound judgment to protect older adults in long-term care facilities. If it wasn't for Riane's analysis of how she saw the world in terms of people who do things from a dominating lens instead of a true partnership lens, I would have had a hard time navigating some of those difficult times when I felt the whole world was against me. And they were. I mean, a lot of people in my own party wanted to reduce me and get rid of me, because nobody wants someone who's not willing to just take it and just stay quiet, because there's so much money, power that was already in line to to prop up the bad policies that some of these politicians were backing. But in that time, when I had clarity on some of the toxic predatory behavior that we have seen so much of in politics, when it's dominated by some of the outdated mindset of mostly men who see public service as a game of domination, a win-lose situation where I have to climb to the top by invalidating or destroying other people's careers. And that is not the model that I believe in. And that's one example of how we changed the course of politics in places like New York. And that's how we overcame and changed the narrative and built a wider coalition that led to a larger movement around healthcare and long-term care. And it was really because we were able to center the truth and solutions around the people on the ground that were impacted the most, the end recipients of care that were left behind, and their families. And all of a sudden, we had coalitions from all spectrums of the politics, both left, right, middle, because we all care about our parents. We all care about our families. We want to make sure that our grandparents and everyone else in between have the ability to retire with dignity, and if they're sent to a facility, that those facilities do their job in making sure they keep them safe in those places.
Can you talk about the economic considerations in the work you're doing? Because, Riane's Caring Economics is really about valuing each other, the planet on which we live, and some of that work is really looking at longer returns, as opposed to the immediate impact of, for instance, running a nursing home. How can you increase the revenues as quickly as possible versus how can you improve quality of life for that individual and their entire family, which sometimes is a little harder economically to quantify.
Yeah. It's not just the patient that's suffering in a long-term care facility, or someone who's not getting the proper home care service that they deserve, but it's the entire family structure around that individual that impacts the local and state economy. So when a child or a next generation of caretakers have to sacrifice their careers, their small businesses, to now take care of older adults because the government or the state is not filling those gaps for them, that has a direct impact on our economy and our state, and all things that could be fixed if we just raise the wages for the workers that take care of older adults and other disabled Americans in this country. But we don't do it because we fundamentally don't believe in paying for care at the same rate as Riane often refers to this, as we pay for an electrician or a plumber or even a police officer or fireman. We've normalized the devaluing and unvaluing of care work so much that it's taking us years to even increase a few dollars for care workers. And that's where I think, we still need a lot of work. But on top of that, we also kind of normalized this outsourcing of care to third parties, meaning no one wants to be blamed. So we contract out everything. There's in the last 11 years, the state of New York alone have sold dozens of county and state-run facilities and privatized them because no one wants to take responsibility of care. And I love the nonprofits that take these roles, but they can't fix the care economy alone. We need a government, an administrative capacity to care for people as if it's a public duty. And the more we outsource, the more we contract things out, we're just setting ourselves up failure so we can blame each other. And that is not building partnership, because that's just scapegoating people when things fail. And this country used to be amazing 100 years ago when the Woodrow Wilsons and FDRs saw a need when the private markets were failing to build bridges and build tunnels. And we created some of the most amazing public agencies the world has ever seen. In New York alone, we have what we call the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey, with the first bi-state government that manages all the airports and the bridges. We have the MTA, we have the Power Authority. FDR, when he went to president, oversaw the Fleet Corporation, the Commerce Department, all these things we used to be good at building. But if we apply the same level of passion and dedication for the care infrastructure as we built bridges and tunnels 100 years ago, we will get this right in a minute. And that's the level of leadership and partnership combined that we need in this country to really finance care and build an infrastructure and then not just punt it to third parties and set them up to fail.
So how do you think we get there?
We have to get government to get back into the business of caring for people. And that's the way that I've been framing it, because oftentimes when government gets involved, there's this scary word, called socialism. Oh, it's a public takeover. We don't want any more public involvement. It's not socialism. It's not, public takeover. It's private public balance. Right now, there is no balance. Everything has been privatized, where the government, all we're doing is punting our duty, and it's one giant procurement office where we're just outsourcing our duty to care for each other to third parties. So I think we need to elect the right people in executive positions to take on the hard task, just like FDR and Wilson and others have done in the past, and treat this like real infrastructure. Because I know that Riane and many others on her board talked about that, like caring infrastructure. But what does that mean? It can't be just about waiting around for the federal government to give us grants. We have to put the ground financing mechanism to publicly pay for care from the ground up, and not just wait for the White House to get their act together.
You are listening to the Power of Partnership podcast. If you would like us to share your partnership story, or if you would like to become a proud sponsor of the POP podcast, please contact us at center@partnershipway.org. And now, back to today's episode.
It is more critical now than ever, in light of the toxic politics that we see every time we turn on social media. All we're seeing is people trying to dominate each other and subjugate others. And part of that, I understand where it's coming from and how we got here. And many people have different theses, but we are a nation with deep traumas and deep histories that, quite frankly, you might not have been honest about, and we might not have taught properly growing up and confronted from young ages what our shortfalls and shortcomings have been as a nation. And to deal with that kind of trauma, we are overcompensating with dominating personalities. And instead of moderating, instead of rationalizing and building compromising partnerships and beyond, that's a harder path to take to really, and it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of trust, conversations, and less social media knee-jerk reactions. to people to build a human to human trust again. And that's what we need to heal. And we haven't had the level of healing as a nation for a long time, if not ever, and I just think that's what Riane's work and what you're doing on this podcast and all the dedicated people around you and Riane is so important, because without understanding how we got here and intellectualizing what partnership truly means, we will never be able to overcome the deep traumas of our past, and we'll continue to go back to our bad habits of fighting, dominating, and seeing every interaction with humans as a validation or invalidation of me. And that's not how anyone should be living.
So, Ron, are you seeing areas where there is bipartisan agreement that you're able to build upon? And are you seeing spots where there's a willingness to find partnership-based solutions that are really outside the box?
Yeah, I've been very successful working with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle around care, around long-term care. And if you take away all the ideologies and all the pandering politics and focus on the constituents in our backyards, and everyone understands that we have a crisis around long-term care. We have a aging older adult crisis in this country and globally, and we don't have an answer for. So that's something that we're continuously trying to put together coalitions. And surprisingly, there are truth seekers on both sides of the aisle, that they don't care about what their politics or machine clubs are telling them to say, but they genuinely care about the people that they serve. I think it's the right language that we use, where we don't, and it's a lot of it's the partnerism language, right? It's to create a safe space where I don't invalidate anyone, and accepting and listening first to where they're coming from. And when you do that, I think there's a lot of truth seekers in politics that are eager to show their constituents that there's something systemically broken, and I'm willing to step out of the line and build partnerships in all circles to get to that truth for this country. And sometimes people surprise you. Sometimes people, you make assumptions about certain groups, but that's why you have to take the time to show up and listen, because at the end of the day, whether you're, a big businessman or a fighting for workers on the ground, like, I think we care about the same human level interactions, and we care about each other the same way that we forget sometimes. But I think the biggest challenge is administering and executing on partnerships, because when you're on the ground and when there's a conflict, when you're feeling emotional about a certain event and other people that may not be aligned with you, some of your worst instincts take over, right? And you become naturally combative when it becomes fight or flight kind of a moment, and the worst outcomes come out of those moments. I think it's important in those moments that we stop reacting to the moment, because we have become a nation, politically also, a nation with so much knee-jerk reactions to conflicts. We need to respond better as a community. And sometimes you need to take a step back and figure out what is the right path out of this that's going to resolve this problem. And I think that's the one piece that, as a practitioner, that we need to figure out how to execute the partnerships at the very local level better. Because these days, especially in urban environments, Cherri, I tell you, people are very triggered. You bump into the person the wrong way at a subway, you never know what you're walking into. And I don't blame them if you understand where that person just came from, from working two jobs and being in debt, can't pay the rent. It's 98 degrees outside and the air conditioner is broken in the subway. one little bump, one little conflict will cause a fire. And I think we see that all around us, everywhere. And instead of reacting, we need to figure out how to pause and respond better to situations.
So are there resources or organizations you would recommend our listeners explore to learn more about the politics of partnership?
Well, I would start with Riane's, books. I share her readings and talk about what she has done and the work that she's trying to put forward. But locally, I work closely with organizations that deal with the care workers that are left behind. So in New York, there's a group called Ain't I a Woman campaign, AIW, and Flushing Workers Center, a local nonprofit group in my district. And they've been representing the home care workers that have suffered from years of wage theft in New York State. There's a total of, as an industry, about $6 billion in the last 12 years that they're owed in back wage. And these are now workers that are getting old themselves, and some of them unfortunately have passed, fighting the good fight. And for me to see what they've done and what they're going through, even when all the government agencies and the lawyers and everyone have told them that they don't have a shot at getting their money back, they have persisted. They're not giving up. They're continuing to try to build more coalitions around their cause. And I'm still learning with them. It's been about a 2-year fight, but we're still continuously, working with them, because if you can't get it right, and if you can't build a very foundation of how we build the home care sector, the entire ecosystem of care could be ruined. And that's why, we're very passionate about getting this right, telling the truth. We might not get every dollar that's owed, but at least not gaslight these workers into thinking that, they're the ones that did something wrong. Like, let's tell the truth so we don't repeat these mistakes moving forward. And these are mostly workers that are paid through Medicaid, so they serve low-income communities, and it's also symbolic of a state, unlike some other states that insource the care work. In California, every county, for example, has a long-term care authority that actually pays for home care workers. So it's a quasi-government model where home care workers are viewed and seen and treated as public servants doing public duty. But in New York, we made a choice to outsource that work to all third parties since the 1980s. So no one took responsibility. No one wanted to take responsibility. And, 10, 15 years later, now we're dealing with billions of wage theft, mostly targeting immigrant women and women of color that desperately needed this money. And they were promised this money when they got into the industry, but they were just left behind because, again, we have a long history where people do not care about care. we devalue and unvalue care work. And there isn't a clear example of that than this. And that's why, based on Riane's philosophy of the care economy and building partnerships, I find myself in this middle of this conflict and trying to apply her philosophies to fixing this very complicated problem.
Nice. Well, for our listeners, I will say that we will include links to those organizations in the show notes for today's episode, as well as Riane's The Real Wealth of Nations book. Also in Riane Eisler's Power of Partnership book, she has a whole section in the back about how to promote a partnership political agenda. So it includes resources that really help us understand the language that is used and helps us develop the tools to reclaim emotionally charged words, which really can be embedding domination narratives versus more of a partnership ethos. So those will also be in the show notes, as well as the link for the centerforpartnership.org, where you are always welcome, and we invite you to take any of the courses to learn more about Riane's cultural transformation theory, the partnership domination continuum, and everything we've spoken about today. So, Assemblyman Kim, I'm wondering if you have any final thoughts that you would like to share with our listeners today.
Every time I engage with Riane's network and circle, it's always timely, because in the world of politics, you have a lot of demoralizing moments where, even though deep inside you seek and want this type of partnership, you're often find yourself surrounded by people who all want something else, who all want to win and climb to the top of power, and while punching down at others. And that's what American politics have become. It's never about, punching up to build coalitions beneath to change the world, but it's about climbing up and punching down at people. And I hope, and I feel grateful, extremely grateful, that when I have these opportunities, I feel like I can reset and I can refocus on why we're here in the first place. So I'm inspired once again by Riane, and I hope that others who follow her work will feel the same way moving forward.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey and wisdom with us today. And a huge thank you for all the work you're doing for the communities you serve.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for listening to the Power of Partnership podcast. We're grateful to Rising Appalachia for the use of Resilience as our Power of Partnership theme music. If you would like us to feature your partnership story, or if you would like to be a proud sponsor of the Power of Partnership podcast, please contact us at center@partnershipway.org. We hope you enjoyed this episode and will leave us a review on your favorite podcast channel. And don't forget to subscribe to be notified when new episodes are released every other Tuesday. I'm Cherri Jacobs Pruitt. See you next time on the Power of Partnership podcast.
I am resilient. I trust the movement. I negate the chaos. Uplift the negative. I'll show up at the table again and again and again. I'll close my mouth and learn to listen.